Guatemala is the largest country in Central America by both area and population. Like other countries in the region, it suffered its fair share of economic and social instability over long periods of its history, and it's a society of great wealth inequality and the consequences that brings. And one of those consequences is, of course, high rates of immigration, particularly to countries like the USA. However, finding a Guatemalan in Tasmania is a bit like sighting a Tasmanian tiger. So I am indeed fortunate to be talking with possibly the only Guatemalan currently settled in Tasmania permanently, Julio, who moved to Blackmans Bay from Sydney with his wife only in 2025. And as it turns out, it has exceeded their expectations. But what brought a Guatemalan to Australia in the first place, let alone Tasmania? Well, it's a long story with a few dramatic twists, including a defining moment at the US-Mexican border. So strap in.
Hello, well, my name's Julio. I am from Guatemala City, Guatemala. I was born and raised in the city. To give you a bit of context in Guatemala, Guatemala is a country that nowadays it's about 18 million people. When I was young, we were about 15, 14, so it's rapidly growing. But to me, it was a very interesting place because I have to say that I grew up in some sort of a bubble, I would probably say. First of all, because I grew up in the city, so I wasn't exposed to a lot of the rural life and a lot of the realities of life of many, many people. Unfortunately, one of the unfortunate things about Guatemala is that it's a very unequal place as far as when it comes to wealth. So people that live in the city live completely different lives than those who live in rural areas. Growing up in that bubble, I also have to say that I grew up with a lot of privilege, and that privilege came from sacrifices from both of my parents. In the school that they put us in, and the way that they thought of setting us up for our own futures. I also had a bit of a different experience because I grew up very religious. So Guatemala is also a very religious country altogether. Particularly, I grew up Christian, and more specifically in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormon, which also really shaped what my weekends looked like and the type of people I associated with, and it just really, really shaped my experience growing up, I would say, and it really, in a way, turned me into the person I am today. So growing up around with my wider family, I would say family plays a really important role in South American culture to begin with. But for us specifically, it played a really important role, specifically on my mom's side, as my dad has no siblings. My mom comes from a bigger family. She has 8 siblings, so there's 8 of them. And particularly one of her sisters has also 4 kids, the same as her. And we're pretty much the same age and same gender as well. So it's boy, boy, girl, boy. So we kind of like each had our pair to, go adventure with. And that was really, really nice growing up with, because you have always someone to play with. Physically, we didn't grow up super close to each other, but we would visit each other quite frequently, or had sleepovers, or spend time together. I wouldn't say that I grew up incredibly rich in tradition, in Guatemalan traditions per se. I would celebrate the main ones, such as Christmas. Christmas would be pretty big. We would make tamales. We would have family over. We would cook, visit family pretty much all day and eat all day, as most families do. However, there's other traditions that we probably didn't watch us closely, or follow us closely. A good example of that would be maybe Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Death. We have a special dish, fiambre, which, yes, we would eat, but I would only eat from when we visit my grandmother's. Either one, they would always usually cook, but within the house, it was maybe every other year. It wasn't as closely followed as many other families in Guatemala.
What would you say in your childhood would be your strongest memory, or your fondest memory, perhaps?
It's easy, actually. I don't have to think about it too much. My parents put us in really good schools, which took most of the money my dad made. Therefore, there wasn't, budget for traveling overseas. And because I remember growing up, I always longed for an overseas holiday, which most of my schoolmates would have. But one thing we did was hiking volcanoes. My dad was a very avid hiker. So instead of going overseas, we would go hike a volcano, sleep overnight, and then, hike back the next day. And it was pretty much every year since the first volcano I climbed, I still have pictures of it. I was 4 years old. And it's funny because on the way up, I was, having a jolly time, just jumping around, laughing, wasting all my energy going up, where everyone just kind of focusing in hiking up the volcano. But once I got up, I just got too tired and my legs, I just, couldn't walk anymore. And good for us, there were some volunteer firefighters who, were doing drills, and one of them carried me on his back on the way down. Okay. So we were quite fortunate. I think otherwise I would have just to roll down or something. It was definitely something we did religiously every year, sometimes multiple times a year. We would go hiking on volcanoes.
And so you mentioned you went to a pretty good school. So how was that experience, and what were you good at school?
I was good at making other people laugh. I would definitely, to begin with, I was the youngest of 4 kids. So I would say that I was pretty inadvertently very spoiled, as in I didn't have it as hard as my older siblings did. As far as my parents were a bit more loose with me, they gave me a bit of slack. So I didn't take school serious. And this is probably one of the regrets I have looking back.
Okay.
Because school wasn't cheap, and my dad made a big sacrifice, as I said earlier, to just have us in that good school. So for a bit of context, the school I went to was an Austrian school. So it was an Austrian immersion school. So since I was 4, I learned German and English then when I started learning when I was, I think, about 10. So when I graduated, I was already fluent in English, German, and obviously Spanish. So it just really set me up to go explore the world in a way. But I would say that I didn't take school serious. My job in school was to make other people laugh. I was definitely the class clown.
And in high school, for example, did you have some kind of ambition or plan for what you would do when you finished?
I think I started seriously thinking about it when I was 17 years old. And that's when I kind of set a plan for myself. And I said, okay, when I am 19, I will go on my church mission. We do missions for church for 2 years, so I'll do that. And then once I get back, I'm going to study civil engineering. I'm going to get a master's in bridge building. And then I will work as a bridge engineer in Guatemala.
Okay.
Yeah, I was very set on my way. And
well, where did that idea come? Why did you want to do that?
I remember growing up, I would always read in the newspapers that, because Guatemala doesn't really have 4 seasons. We mainly have rainy and non-rainy seasons. So during the rainy season, you would always read that bridges would be crumbling down or falling down, and because they were just not made properly. And I thought, this feels like such a seemingly easy thing to fix, that would connect communities, that would allow commerce to flow more freely. So that's kind of where the idea came from. And then where it got where I decided to, okay, this is what I want to do, is I remember we had a visiting lecturer in school, and he started showing us pictures of buildings of the world. And one of the buildings, or one of the structures, was the Øresund Bridge, which is a bridge that connects, I think, Sweden and Denmark. And it's just an engineering marvel. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, I want to do bridges. And I feel like it also feels like a bit of my personality. I'm a bit of a bridge builder in myself, just making, friendships, making connections between people. That's something that comes naturally to me, I would say, and that I enjoy doing. What I think that the catalyst moment for me, where everything changed, was when I went on my church mission. So, as I said, we go on missions for 2 years, and we don't really get a say to where we serve this mission. My dad did his mission, and he served in Guatemala. 2 of my older siblings have done missions as well. One served in Guatemala and one in Nicaragua. So I always thought, you know what, I'll go probably El Salvador or Honduras, somewhere nearby. But to my surprise, I ended up being sent to California. And this is really where everything changed from my point of view, because I was 18 years old at the time, and I would say I was pretty mature as far as life experiences go. And like I said earlier, I grew up in a bit of a bubble, and I was also, I would say, pretty spoiled, as in I didn't really know how to look after myself, like cook for myself, or like wash my clothes and all of that. I was really catered to me. So in this period, in this transition period, in these 2 years, I just got to exposed to so much in such a short period of time that my whole mindset just changed. And I think a bit of an important context here is that us Guatemalans, we look at the US as kind of we really buy into this American dream, that you go to the US, you make money, you send money to your family, and you're kind of in a way, the savior of your family, just being able to provide and give them opportunities that otherwise would be out of reach to your family back home. So moving to the US kind of opened my eyes to that, and I said, like, look, despite being trilingual and speaking this language, I had never really traveled overseas. I had been to Nicaragua once for a competition, a track meet, but besides that, I hadn't really ever left the country. So leaving the country and going to the US just in a way just blew my mind. I said, look, there's more to life than just Guatemala. And that's where I realized, okay, you know what? Maybe staying in Guatemala and just being a bridge builder there is not that it's meant, it's in store for me. So yeah, this is where everything changed, I would say. The purpose of a mission from a religious point of view is to help others come closer to God, I would say. So I think the biggest thing I learned is I learned to become a bit more selfless and put other people's needs in front of my own. That's definitely a big lesson. Another big lesson, I woke up to the reality of many people's lives. And what I mean is, because I was in California is very heavy on mainly Mexicans who cross the border and work in the fields. So I got to spend a lot of time with these families, and just learning about their life stories and all the sacrifices that they've made me realize, one, how privileged my life had been at that point. And it kind of woke me up to say, look, Julio, like, staying in Guatemala is not the only option. Like, finding out about how these people have migrated, yes, under different circumstances, but how they have sought for a better future elsewhere, kind of woke me up to the idea of saying, look, maybe there's something else I should be chasing. And then I thought, I would not, like, if I'm going somewhere out of Guatemala to go study, it has to be the US, just because of that, having been there before, and now feeling like I spoke the language really well, and I understood the culture, and I had already made many friends there as well. So I think that played a very big role.
And so where did you study?
So I studied in Utah, and it's actually, and I think this, once again, one of the many ways in which growing up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints really shaped my life in many ways, because I went to a church sponsor school, a university sponsor school.
And how was the experience of studying and living there, and how different was it from what you'd experienced previously?
I think that by this point, I would say that it's a different Julio going into university.
Okay.
Growing up, I said I didn't take school that serious, and I wasn't really into school. I was a bit of a class clown. I experienced a lot of growth, and I matured a lot during my mission. So that set me up for school, because I took school very serious, and I was a straight A student. So I got scholarships for and ultimately I ended up being a pretty good student, I would say. And that's also, I think, is just a change in mindset. I think it was difficult, yes, not being a native English speaker. It was extremely, I think that one of the biggest frustrations I had is when people didn't understand my accent. And I worked so hard just to get rid of my accent, just because I just really, when someone asked me to repeat myself, like it was a bit of an insult. It was like, mate, like I've been learning this language and I've been speaking this language for a few years now. Like how come you can't understand me? But looking back at those experiences, I mainly dealt with people who had not spoken with people with accents, so therefore they were kind of used to like everyone speaking perfect English. And obviously it's a country full of immigrants, but unlike Australia, I feel like Australia is a very young country still, and I would say that I was labeled a lot, like, you know, just the way I looked, especially when I was doing an internship in one of the southern states in America, so in the Bible Belt, in Tennessee. That's where I really felt a big cultural shock, and where I just realized I just didn't fit in. I think one of the things I regret about living in America is me, as a Guatemalan, we are people that are very willing to please others and very apologetic in many ways, and we're extremely maybe too kind. And what I mean by that, where I regret that, is because I always felt like I was the one who needed changing, and I was the one who needed to accommodate to others, and I was the one who needed to fit into their mold, instead of me being unapologetically speaking with an accent and, you know, mispronouncing some words, and just because that's the way I usually speak. And I didn't have to put on that filter where I would have to think 2 or 3 times before I spoke. So I remember kind of like hating my accent for the longest time and just wishing I didn't have one, just to be able to fit in.
I want to move on to the next part, how you met your now wife.
Yeah.
Because you met in the USA, right?
Oh, actually, we didn't. Yeah, it's an interesting story. So when I was in the US, I realized I thoroughly enjoyed traveling. And when I was in the US, maybe I visited, I don't know, maybe 46, 45 of the 50 states. A roommate and I decided to go to Europe and going to Europe instead of, usually we would fly back to Guatemala if we were flying overseas. And whilst in Europe, I got in touch with Paige. It was during this trip, and I think it was in Germany at the time, and we just matched on an app, and it was all platonic. We just, you know, started talking. I thought she was, and I still think she's amazing, but like I thought it was really cool that she, as an Australian, she had also served a mission, and she went to Spain. So I thought, oh, that's so amazing. There's this person that speaks Spanish with a Spaniard accent and speaks English with an Australian accent. I wonder what she sounds like, right? Because like I just, in my head, couldn't really fathom these two things, right? Because we just became friends. We started talking just, you know, on the phone. And then once that trip finished, because we didn't even meet in person then, we become very close very quickly. And, you know, after spending a few months talking, I remember one day I just said, you know what? I never really considered Paige, you know, kind of like to be quote unquote an option. Like, you know, like that there something could work out between the two of us, mainly because of distance, right? But maybe there's a chance, right? So I remember, and I was in the Denver airport flying, and I had a very long layover. And I remember just starting Googling flights to Australia and just thinking like, you know what? Like, it is a bit expensive, but like, I always looked at it as like, what if I just like, you know, tried it out? What if I just go to Australia? You know, I get to meet Paige. We see like because in my head I had an idea of what she was, right? Like she was this amazing person. But like, what if I'm wrong? Or what if I'm right? I feel like I have always more to gain than I have to lose. And you know, shortly after, I remember being on the phone with her and saying, "Look, I just need to tell you how I feel, and I feel like you're this amazing person, and I would absolutely love to meet you, and I have feelings for you. And obviously, I have never met you in person, but I'm just head over heels." And I remember there was a big pause, and she just said, "Oh, well, thanks for letting me know how you feel. That's good to know." And that was it.
Oh, God.
So I was like, oh. I was like, okay, well, I just felt it was fair for you to know. And because of time difference, we hung up. and I went to sleep, right? And I was the whole night, I was just like, oh, it's so stupid. Why did I do that? Like, that just blew it. We had this amazing friendship, and now we're not gonna work. Like, so you can really come back from that, right? Like,
Yeah.
So I remember waking up the next day, and just the first thing I just called her again before she went to bed, and I said, look, I just want to apologize because I just let my feelings get the better of me, and I obviously appreciate our friendship much more than, you know, what I feel for you. So I would much rather have you still as a friend than, you know, pursue something else if clearly you might not feel that way. So obviously I was putting words in her mouth by this point, but she just asked me, well, like, are you taking back what you said? And I was like, well, no, but like, what do you mean? Like, could you elaborate? Like, I would never, like, I don't take that back. I still feel that way, but I just really enjoy your friendship. And she's like, well, I told her, like, please tell me, how do you feel? Like, what do you think? And she's like, look, my feelings are definitely not mature as yours are. Like, I think you're great, but honestly, I have more questions than answers at this point. Like, I definitely don't feel the same way, but I'm not close to the idea. So then that's when we decided, okay, you know what? Like, why don't we agree to just meet up? Either you fly over or I fly over. The deal was, if I fly over, you pay for like everything we do. So if, you know, if we go to parks or we eat out, whatever, you pay for that, and I pay for my flights. And if you fly, we do the opposite. So that, in a way, it felt like, you know, we were both somewhat, like, it was a mutual agreement in that we're equally investing in this venture, if you will. I ended up flying over to Australia, met her. I was here for 2 weeks, and she was even better than I thought. So, fortunately for me, and I remember being on the flight, you know, like this 12-hour flight from, I think I flew through Dallas to Sydney, and I was thinking the whole time, like, what if I'm being catfished? Like, and I was just like, this uneasy feeling came, you know, I started feeling that it came to me, and I was like, wow, what if it's like, you know, like a 50-year-old dude, like living in his basement with, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, what am I doing? So, but fortunately, that wasn't the case. Then we met in the middle once. We were both in Hawaii. We met in Hawaii once. So we were both making big sacrifices monetarily, but this wasn't sustainable long term. Ultimately, I'm still in college. I was working as a teacher assistant. I was, you know, minimum wage. So it was a sacrifice paying this, I don't know, like maybe $800, $900 ticket just to see each other. The idea was that we would eventually, if things were progressing as they were, this was about 6 months into the relationship, 8 months into the relationship, we decided that once I finished uni, I always had the idea of moving back to the Bay Area. The cool thing about the Bay is that you're only a flight away from Sydney to San Fran, and also a flight away from Guatemala. So it was obviously much closer to Guatemala, but it was a good middle ground just in the meantime to agree on. So that was the plan, but there was a bit of a twist in the tail. So like I said, about 8 months into a relationship, Paige and I had spent some time in Hawaii, and then I flew to LA. She went back to Sydney, kind of like changed her bags. I think she needed to do some things for uni. And then she would fly into LA, where we would meet, and then fly to Guatemala, so where she could meet my family. At this point, I had met her family a few times already, but she had never met mine other than video. So we thought it was appropriate, you know, like 8 months into this relationship, it's starting to get a bit serious, I would say, for her to meet my family. So while we were in LA, we had, I think, 3 or 4 days before we went back we had the flight from LA to Guatemala. So, and Paige had some friends she wanted to visit in Mexico, but just across the border in Tijuana. Actually, by that point, I think I had never been to Mexico before, so I said, let's do it. So we got on a bus from LA, got to the border, we crossed, we met with his friend, really cool guy. We just, you know, had a really good time in Mexico. On the way back, this is where everything gets interesting. Paige left her purse in the Uber that was taking us back to the border to cross, because we crossed the border, the Tijuana into San Diego, pretty much. And this border is well known for lots of trafficking, both human trafficking and drug trafficking. So it's a border with a lot of surveillance. So I was already a bit nervous for that reason, right? And then Paige left her purse in the Uber, and that just made me a ball of nerves, because then I was trying to contact Uber to get in touch with the driver, who then blackmailed us into getting him back the purse, because he was apparently really far away, and he would only give it to us if we gave him a certain amount of money. But we had no other choice, right? It was either that or missing our flight from LA to Guatemala the next day. So we were in a bit of a time crunch. So we ended up getting the purse back, but the phone mysteriously disappeared in the car. So we just got the purse, which had her passport. That's the main thing, right? So, a few hours later, and both of us just being stressed out of our minds, we finally had both her papers, my papers. We walked over to the border, and I remember I was still a bit shaken up by this experience, by not having the passport and by being rushed, and because we might also miss our bus into LA, and I was just a ball of nerves. And I remember when I got to the counter, as usual, they asked hey, why are you here? Papers, passport. So I just started handing over all my documents. So I was a bit of I don't want to say unique case, but not a common case. Mm-hmm. So when the officer, the patrol officer, saw my documents, he was a bit confused, and he was like, oh, so can I see your F1? It's like, oh yeah, that's the next page. So he started just looking very thoroughly through my documents. And then he got hung up on the idea that I had already graduated university, because I had just graduated 2 weeks before. So I had an EAD, an employment authorization card, which I had received, and I provided it to him, and I said, hey, look, this is my employment document. I can't work yet. I'm gonna start working because there's a bit of a waiting period, and this is my offer letter. So I provided all of the documents, and he was just not convinced. So he said, why don't you come with me to secondary revision, right? And so he took me at the back. Paige at this, and Paige was like, what do I do? It's like, oh, just wait for him here. Okay, perfect. So she went through. I was into secondary revision. They took me into this, smaller interrogation room. And then this, tough, unfortunately for me, power-hungry officer came and just started telling me, what is it you want to do? Why do you want to come into this country? Who do you think you are? Your documents are not in order. Blah, blah. And he just started ripping into me. And this is where I should have channeled my inner Guatemalan and just kind of just be submissive and say, I'm very, very sorry. These are all the documents. This is all a big confusion. Everything is in order. Just let me show you this and that. But instead, I just decided to fight back, and I just wouldn't have it, right? So I just said no, you are wrong. I am right because X, Y, Z. And I have these documents. I can prove to you. Here's my job letter. Here's my document, and da-da-da. And I have spoken with the university. I have these emails, and we just went back and forth. Started screaming at each other at one point. And in his anger, he just said, look, you're not coming into the US today, regardless of what happens, regardless of what you do, of what documents you have, you're just not getting in. And this is kind of when I realized that what was happening, right? That this whole American dream, this whole life I had planned for ourselves at this point, it just crumbled in front of me. And it was just incredibly shocking because I had no idea what was going to happen, right? And Paige obviously had gone through her documents, were all fine. So I remember can I talk to my partner? Can I talk to my girlfriend and figure this out? And she's like, well, you have 30 seconds, and you can't give her anything. So she didn't have her phone, so she had no ways of communicating. By this point, it's already dark, so it's already late, and it's just crossing the border. So it's a lot of shady characters in the area, and she knows nobody because, in LA, it was my friend, right? Not she didn't know him. And on top of that, she got her purse back, which luckily had one of her cards, her credit card. So at least she had means, because I wasn't allowed to give her my credit card because I said hey, just use my card, whatever you need. But the police officer said like, hey, you can't give her you need to keep your credit card. I'm like, oh. So I left her with that, and I just gave her my friend's phone number. I said, look, give him a call somehow, try and contact him, and I'll see you on the other side, right? Like it was just, I had no idea what was going to happen. And this was just incredibly scary, not only for me, but also for her as well. Because, I mean, I had no idea how long it would be until I was back in Guatemala, where I was going to be deported to. So I had no idea if Paige was actually going to go through with the flight and fly by herself. I was taken then back to, and this is where like a bit of the trauma starts, to a little waiting room where I would see how they would be picking people to get deported as well. But these are mainly people who are presenting fake IDs, who are smuggling drugs. I remember they were taking pictures of someone who was trying to smuggle, I think it was ice, or I can't remember what it was, but some drug. And from there, I got taken into a detention center, which was just packed with people, families, kids, everything, women, and mainly like, maybe 95%, 90% were Mexican, mainly because just of the proximity. But there were some people that, some Asians, a few Middle Easterns as well. So, and most of these, like, it was a bit of a mixed bag, right? Like you have these shady characters who are like, drug smugglers, and they're just, I think what they call them mules. Yep. So they, they're just carrying the drugs. But you also have people who are smuggling people who get caught, in a bunch, and they get caught with the people who were smuggling them. So they get all taken there. I got taken into a room maybe 4 meters wide by 9 meters long, and there was maybe at one point like maybe 28 of us in that room, because we got split into rooms, and then they would go case by case. They would call you up and say, okay, what's your case, why are you here, where are you from, how are we gonna get you back? So I was completely incommunicated for the first 7 days. So Paige had no idea where I was, if I was alive or not, or exactly what was happening with me. And it was until after the first 7 days that I got to call home and say, hey, I'm alive. I should be coming home soon.
So where did you go after that? Like,
so
did you get to go back to Guatemala?
Yeah. So how it works is that I think it's part of the, and this is just my speculation, right? But what they do is they take you to this detention center to kind of like break your spirits.
Yep.
Because what they do is they try and kind of teach you a lesson and say, look, if you're trying to come in this country legally, this is what's going to happen. And I actually saw that happening. I saw people, like, and these are people, by this point, I'm 24, 25. Mm-hmm. I'm one of the younger ones, I would say, amongst the adults, right? And I see people that, have kids and are going there to, cross the border and work, whose spirits are completely broken. And something that I witnessed there as well is that many times people, just get high on drugs, and they just try and cross while on high, and then they get there and they just becomes a bit of a rehab center. I remember one that was just taking one of the 2 toilets we have in the room, and he was just vomiting for like 3 days straight, wasn't eating, and was just, crazy talk, eyes all red. And it was quite a scary but like a life transforming experience, I would say, in that it gave me a lot of time to reflect and think of, one, what I had lost, but 2, how I was gonna react and come back from it. So after 7 days, I got the option to either wait for a plane to fill up with Guatemalans to then be taken, with the rest of the Guatemalans who are being deported from all across the country. Mm-hmm. They would bring it into this detention center, and once the plane fills, I would be taken back. I think they were trying to inflict fear upon me, because they say, oh, look, that could take maybe 1 month, 2 months, so I would be waiting there for a month or 2. Or you can buy your own ticket. So you pay for your ticket, and you just buy it whenever as soon as you can, as soon as you want. Obviously, it's on your expense, but the ticket has to have certain rules. It can only have layovers in certain places, and they can be no longer than a certain period of time. And mainly because the whole time you're in custody, so there's a police officer with you accompanying you the whole time. So I ended up doing that. And I remember when the date come to that I was due to leave, and it was a bit hard to keep track of time because I was in a room that had lights on 24/7. So you kind of like lose track of time. You kind of like you kind of follow time by the times that they feed you, and they let us shower I think once or twice while I was there, which was nice. But the whole time you're just just you feel like I don't know, just an animal, right? Like I mean, I wish there was a better word to describe this, and animal might be too kind even, but
sounds very dehumanizing.
completely.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where I had held the United States in such high standards in my head, and I always felt like my future was there. Yeah, I always thought that was the place for me. But after that experience, I just woke up to the fact that I wasn't like that it was probably not for me, right? And it was probably not the place I should be wanting to go back to after going through that experience. So I ended up, they ended up missing my flight, not taking me. I ended up ended up staying there 9 days. And after the 9 days, they finally took me to the airport. I flew back. And I remember flying back. This is a bit of a funny side story, but I remember flying back. I felt like this really bad guy, because up to this point I've always considered myself to be a nice guy. I've never really committed a heinous crime or anything like that, but I remember the look on everyone's faces because when you board the plane, you're the first one to board and the first one to get out, and they like call you out on the when the plane lands. It's like, oh, can we get please passenger Julio Alvarez to please stand up and come to the front, and like the police officer comes in, kind of like escorts you. Right. And I remember the look on people's faces, like who's this gang member, who's this criminal, who's this mastermind, and I remember putting a bit of a bad boy face on just to like make the most out of it. At this point, I was just glad to go home though. So when I got back, to my surprise, Paige was there. Okay. With my family, and she extended her stay in Guatemala so we could spend more time together. By this point, I was quite traumatized, so I lost 10 kilos in these 9 days. I wasn't eating for the first few days, so when I got back, and my whole family was in anguish this whole time because I only spoken to them once, well actually twice. Once is when I told them I was gonna arrive on a certain date. Then the next time I need to tell them like, hey, actually they missed my flight or they didn't take me to the airport, so I'm gonna arrive 2 days later or a day later. So it was just the first thing was just relief. So it was on this trip that once I got back to Guatemala that I realized, well, I don't know when I'm going to see Paige again, because the easiest path from Guatemala to Australia is through the US, through LA. So I have no idea when I'm going to see her again. I still have an Australian visa, so I knew I could get there. But without an American visa, it would be a bit of a headache. And I wouldn't get a new Australian visa if I had already lost my American, because it could just look bad in my history. So I realized this is probably my last chances to spend time and be with Paige until I don't know when. So on the last day of the trip that she had extended to be with me, I remember I talked to, I think it was my brother or my mom, I can't remember who, and I borrowed a ring. Well, we went on an overnight hike. We went to a very famous place in Guatemala called Lake Atitlan, Lago Atitlan, and there's a hike called Nariz del Indio, the Indian Snows, that has a gobsmacking view of the lake, especially in the morning. And so we did that. We were doing that, and the whole time I was like in two minds. Like, should I propose? Should I not propose? Should I propose? Should I not propose? Because one of the really important things that Mormons, or within their religion, people tend to marry quite quickly. So, and Paige was very clear since the beginning. I said, like, look, like, don't even dream about proposing to me. Have we not dated for at least 1 year? That's the bare minimum. I want to make sure that we get to know each other and that we spend enough time, especially because we were long distance for a while as well. Like, it wasn't a regular relationship, let's call it like that. Yeah. So by this point we had been dating, I think it was 9 months officially. So was not quite there, not quite the year mark. But I just thought, look, I'm not sure when I'm going to see her again. And I always thought the worst thing she can say is no. And you know, like, and I know it doesn't mean a relationship is over. Like, I know it just means, look, if you don't want to wait for the year, I'll be respectful of that, and you just wait. And so we ended up doing this morning hike. We climbed this rock with a guide, and then I asked the guy, hey, would you mind like taking some pictures of us? And so he went down, got to a nice platform to get the whole lake. And while he was taking pictures, I remember, and she told me like, Julio, like, I'm a bit scared because we were in a bit of a rock unsteady place, and she told me like my legs are shaking. And I was like, my legs are shaking too. And that's when I like got on one knee. Obviously I was nervous, and I got on one knee, and I said like, and she was like, oh. I could see in her face kind of like the surprise, but kind of like not the good surprise, kind of like the bad surprise. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? No. And I was like, hey, look, will you marry me? And she just said, long pause again. She was like, yes, I guess. And it was so funny because then, yeah, exactly, just wow, whew, sweating bullets all around, and, you know, just so nervous. And I had the ring in this Ziploc bag because I didn't want to lose it, and it still had a tag on it. So then I kind of like symbolically quickly put it on her finger. Then she looked at it and said like, well, is this my ring? And I was like, no, I just borrowed that ring. That's not yours. Like, oh, good, I don't like it. I was like, oh, great. But so it was quite funny how it all happened.
Tell me about how the move to Australia came about.
After that, we were obviously figuring out where we're gonna live, how we're gonna make this work. What we decided was that first I would come to Australia, but not through the US, but through South America. Spend some time here, and I ended up spending, I think, a month and a half here in Australia. And we had an engagement party. I got to know more of her family. We got to share the news with them. And then the plan was for either me to come here on a student visa and study either English, which didn't make any sense. And it was an option where I was like, because that's how most people come here, right? Like, especially South Americans, you just come study English and then just visa hop until you make your way into permanent residency. It was either that, studying a master's, which was a lot of money, and I wasn't fond of studying a master's without any experience, or for Paige to move to Guatemala. We ended up deciding for her to move back, to move to Guatemala, and for us to get married there, and then apply for an offshore visa and move back to Australia.
So you got married in Guatemala?
Yes.
Yep.
So then Paige moved to Guatemala. We lived there for 2 years. For me, it was a very joyful time because I moved out when I was 18. I had been in the States for about 6 years by this point. So I didn't really have a relationship with my nieces and nephews. So spending time in Guatemala was amazing because I got to strengthen those relationships, and Paige had the opportunity in my head and in my mind, from my opinion, she had the opportunity to experience Guatemalan culture, because whether I'm an average Guatemalan or not, I am still a Guatemalan, and she needs to understand what my culture is, and especially when we have kids, like, I want them to feel some sort of connection to Guatemala, right? Despite them, being born in Australia and being raised here. It's still really important to me. So for Paige to understand my culture and understand Guatemalan ways of living, and you kind of like understand what makes me who I am.
Yeah.
So it was a really good opportunity. However, for Paige, it was extremely hard because Guatemala is a very maybe not kind towards women, and not kind towards. Paige lost a lot of her privilege. And what I mean by privilege is she couldn't walk by herself on the street. Streets were not safe for her to walk on. She would draw a lot of attention just, being Caucasian in Guatemala. So I remember once she got followed by someone on the street and she was just freaking out. And I was freaking out as well. And I was, at work. She was just messaging me, calling me. And experiences like that really kind of make me realize that staying there long term for us wasn't an option, especially because of Paige's mental health. And as much as I loved spending time there, it wasn't a place we could both comfortably call home. So COVID happened, which also shattered everyone's plans, including ours, because we were planning on, doing back and forth between Australia and Guatemala whilst my visa came, or at least Paige to go back and visit family. But unfortunately, with COVID, that wasn't an option.
And so tell me about coming to Australia and when that happened.
Yeah, so then my visa came through. As soon as my visa came through, it was COVID, so it was really hard to travel. It was 2021. And I remember just begging Paige, just like, please let me stay a few more months. Because it came actually a lot faster than I wanted. It came, I think, within like 6 or 8 months. So, and I was like, look, I'm not ready to leave. Like, I have been away from my family for 6 years now. I'm really enjoying this phase of our lives. And she was gracious enough to say, you know what, we're not going to leave straight away. We're going to stay a few more months. But once we got to Australia, I would say that it was like a glove adjusting to life in Australia. It was seamless, like absolutely seamless. I feel like I had been already 3 times here, in Sydney, and it was just, I think, something that really helped, especially compared to the US. By this point, I had started my life over 1, 2, 3, 4, like this is my 6th time starting over, just going back and forth, and then finding a new job and finding, making friends and just starting from scratch again, which I quite welcome because Paige's mental health had suffered a lot during our time in Guatemala. So I was really keen for her to find a good place mentally, and for both of us to just find a place we could permanently call home. And to me, that's what Sydney was when we arrived in Sydney. And Paige had always the plan of going back to that more rural lifestyle and, more easy pace and more smaller town. And when I got to Sydney, I just could not see myself anywhere else but Sydney. I was like, you know what? I've started my life so many times again. Like, I'm gonna die in Sydney. You're gonna bury me in the opera house, and maybe, maybe you, like, I don't know, you chop me in two, like part of me here, part of me in Guatemala, or, but like I just felt like I belonged, and I didn't see myself anywhere else but Sydney. It was a place I could call home. And I think it also helped that I had working rights from the get-go. So I didn't have to do any of the visa hassle I had to do in the US, or I had to, get jobs like under the table, as they call them, right? Like, like cash jobs like I had to do in the US. So that really made it feel like I belonged from day one. And also, Australia being such a young country as far as immigrants, made me realize that I, as a Guatemalan, I can be a Guatemalan and an Australian, and that's okay. To me, coming to Australia is not like, it wasn't like the US where I had to leave myself behind and become that new person. It was, bring yourself. You're welcome here. You are who you are, and there's a place for you here. And that's something I never felt in, anywhere else I've been outside Guatemala, where I feel like I can be myself and I don't have to pretend or let go of any of my culture.
So you said that you thought you were going to live in Sydney for the rest of your life, but we're here in Tasmania now. So how did that all happen?
Sydney is an amazing city, lots of opportunities, lots of friends, lots of things to do. But unless you're okay either sharing a home with 5 other flatmates, living in a generational home with your mother-in-law and family who are gracious enough to have us for a while, or living in a shoebox in an apartment, it's just a bit hard to financially, especially as a recent migrant, to make it work in Sydney. Especially to have a yard. Let's just put it. I think that would be the metric of success for me. Just being able to have greenery. So Paige had always said like, "Hey Julio, like let's just explore other areas. Like why don't we look into Adelaide? Why don't we look into Melbourne?" I was like, no, Melbourne is too cold. We were never gonna move to Melbourne. Here we are. But or even Central Coast within Sydney. Just said like we don't have to live in Sydney. But I was just adamant on the idea that like I came to Sydney, and in Sydney I lived in the northern beaches, and I just absolutely fell in love with that place. So it was just quite discouraging to think like, you know what, like first Sydney became out of reach. Now Central Coast is becoming out of reach. Like how far do we want to be outside of Sydney to still be close to Sydney? And at that point, Paige had already floated the idea of, going to Adelaide. And one day I guess something changed in me, and I just said, look, let's just move to Tassie. And I had never even been here. Like I had no idea what that. Like I just knew it was an island in the south, right? Like, and that's pretty much all I knew. So then, once I, kind of like bought into that idea, then things actually started moving, right? Like things got into motion. And said, okay, for the Easter break, we came here about a year ago. It was a bit of a surreal experience, because we brought our car over in the ferry, and just coming to. Like driving into Tassie was just like, wow, so this is it. And we did a bit of a road trip, went to Strawn, we went to Freycinet, we saw some of the, Cradle Mountain, Dove Lake. And we just got absolutely enchanted with Tasmania, to the point that like, I remember telling Paige, you know what, I'm just gonna stay here. I was working already at this point back already, so work has an office in Rosny Hill, so I remember driving up to Rosny Hill every day, working in the office, sometimes showering there, and just realizing like, wow, Tasmania is amazing, like it's really a hidden gem, and that's when I said, you know what, well, like we will said, by this point we had already looked at houses, and even better than like all the nature. To us were the house prices as well, because it was coming from Sydney, obviously like you're used to seeing houses in the 1.3 1.7 in the millions, right, which are unfortunately off our budget, but here you can get something quite decent below the million, and that to us was the nail in the coffin to say, okay, that's it, we're moving. So during that trip in Tasmania, we ended up, I by this point, Paige was already back in Sydney. I ended up coming to an open house, with very little expectation. So I had heard good things about Kingston and Blackmans Bay. I came here, toured the house, and I told Paige, look, it's not bad. By this point, I think we had placed a bid on 3 other properties that hadn't worked out for us. And I said, why don't we just place a bid and see what happens? And to our surprise, we ended up getting our offer was accepted. That was Saturday, where we placed the offer. On Monday, it got accepted. And then the house settled, and Paige ended up moving the 9th of July by herself here in Tassie. And I came a few weeks later.
And of course, it's one thing to see Dove Lake and Strawn, all these beautiful places around Tasmania as a visitor, but what was the experience of settling in like? And was it as you expected?
It was a fear to a degree that, I guess, mirroring it to my relationship with Paige, one of my fears was that we only saw each other on vacations. So we only kind of like saw the highlights, and we were spending time together. It wasn't like the everyday life where you're working and you're busy and you have all these things going on. So it was a bit of like moving here. I would say that it was probably even better. And what I mean by that is that we kind of went blind into buying into this area, but we are absolutely in love with the area. Just being close to the beach, I think having our own place also makes this a bit of a magical place and a special place to us, because we feel like we're setting roots here. And one of the things we also actually loved is just the diversity. Like, for instance, if I wanted to see snow in Sydney in winter, I'm driving 2-3 hours away. Here, I just, look out the window, I see Mount Wellington, and there's, snow in the mountain. Yeah. And it's just that closeness to nature that to us makes Tassie feel even more so like home. The best way to describe it to mainlanders is I always tell them, look, Tassie is, to me, what Australia would have, like mainland Australia would have been 35, 40 years ago maybe, where it's just slower pace, where you have time to interact with your neighbor and know them by name, yep. And you have them over for dinner, and not just be so caught up in the rat race that it is to just make money, afford a mortgage, and just never-ending race that we were stuck in Sydney.
Obviously, one of the difficult parts for people settling in Tasmania sometimes is work because there aren't as many opportunities. So what have you been doing here?
I am fortunate enough that because work has an office here, with, after COVID, many workplaces are starting to ask people to go back into the office, and so did my workplace. So I work for a major food retail company, and I work as a data analyst. More specifically, I'm a digital analyst, so I analyze users' behaviors on our digital ecosystems, how they interact with our app and web. And my job is to help the team make, smart decisions on how and where we invest money into the development, on if the money we invest into developing features, how successful they are. Fortunately for me, all of my job can be done remotely. So I'm very fortunate that I have that. And even, moving down to Tasmania, I made sure that I brought everyone at work on board. And I said, I'm potentially moving to Tasmania, and therefore I'm not going to be present in this office. I will be going to the Tasmanian office. No one in my team is in Tasmania. And I also agreed to say, I'll be coming up regularly to Sydney. And I go maybe every other month. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Guatemala personally. Mm-hmm. Love because it's the place that saw me be born and grow up, and it's all I was doing the math, and I lived a third of my life overseas and 2/3 in Guatemala. So mathematically speaking, I'm more Guatemalan than anything else. And mm-hmm. By my passport, that's all I am. So I have a strong affiliation to my home country. But there's so many things that I like about it, such as, how much nature there is, how welcoming it is, how kind people are. It's also known as the place of the eternal spring. That's a nickname because of first of all, nice weather. We're always in, between, well, not always, but majority of the year between 17 and 24. So it's really, really nice weather. But also it's eternal spring, which is because I feel like people are flourishing and people are, it's a bit cheesy for me to say all this, but it just, I feel like it is such an amazing country that when I think of it, I'm just incredibly proud to say I'm Guatemalan, and I'm never letting that go. But at the same time, there's a few things that really sting, and such as Guatemala is an extremely culturally diverse country. There's obviously Spanish is the main language, but there's 23 indigenous languages. I don't speak any of them. My dad speaks one of them through his LDS mission, through his mission, but there is still a lot of racism towards those indigenous people, similar to how we were talking about the Bridgewater, kind of the way that it was established, and it was just systematic that these people were living in the way that they were. Similarly, Guatemala experienced systematic racism in that since the colonizers arrived, indigenous people have had the disadvantage. We could, very similar to
Yeah, that's the story in many places,
exactly.
including Australia and
including
Tasmania.
Australia, maybe less known, but especially here in Tasmania, I guess, with the way that it was colonized and just wiped out pretty much, unfortunately. But like, I think now we're living with this incredibly openly racist country towards indigenous that is just so embedded in the system that once you start seeing it, you just can't unsee it. But it's more so you're just ingraining that disparity, economic disparity. Like if we think there is some here in Australia, Guatemala is just exponential, where you have people dying out of lack of food, whilst the 1% having 90% of the country's economy, like the wealth. So I think that's a reality that it's just incredibly hard to live with. But I think that I wish Guatemala was more proud and highlighted more of the people who actually carry the culture and whose culture, because I feel like I'm just piggybacking off, and obviously that I didn't get a say to where I was born and what family I was born into, right? But like, had I been born into a family 3 doors down, my life would be completely different, right? And I think that's true for anyone, but I think in Guatemala, just the disparity is just night and day. And so I feel extremely privileged, lucky, and I owe that to my parents.